Good afternoon, everyone. Bill Phillips here from Prince George Daily News with our weekly panel discussion about all things that are going on in our world. And we're joined this week by Tracy Calogheros, who's back. She was away there for a little while and came back to join us. And Mackenzie Kerr and Chuck Nisbett and Todd Corrigall. So there's lots going on this week, man, oh man. But let's start local and then spread our ways out. Revelations this week, or ongoing revelations this week at City Hall about the cost overruns at the George Street Parkade, which is originally going to be about $12.6 million, jumped up to 17, then to 22, and then when they figured out how much the city had to do over and above the parkade, it's now up around $34 million. So to put things in perspective, we will get a parkade for the same price as a brand new swimming pool. And the revelations that city staff quite likely knew about, well, obviously knew about these overruns and kept it from city council. Todd, you want to kick things off about what the heck is going on over there, and what does this mean for the city?
I don't know where to start. I think in the spirit of legal terminology, we'll say allegedly right now. But allegedly $22 million of taxpayers' money was misappropriated without the consent of the elected officials. But, there's a myriad of issues that come up with this, whether it's, an individual or several individuals on the administrative side that have decided that was the action they were going to take, whether member or members of council knew about it or didn't know about it. What's most shocking and challenging to me as a former bureaucrat and a senior bureaucrat is the ethical question that lies there, is that at least somebody knew at least some point and said nothing to anybody, or at least nothing constructively was directed somewhere for action to be taken on this. And I know Mr. Wells reasonably well, and he's a great guy, but he implicitly said on the third or fourth ask of the question that all of senior administration knew what was going on, or senior administration knew what was going on. And that's quite problematic. And you could tell that he struggled with that response. He struggled mightily. There was quite a long pause between the question and the answer. And so the problem from my standpoint is we're now almost 48 hours since that meeting, and I don't see a special meeting anywhere on the agenda. That in-camera session should have been called immediately for as soon as it could have been convened legally within the Municipal Government Act, and it's still not on the agenda. So from my standpoint, the biggest issue right now is MIA leadership.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, what are your thoughts on what's transpired here? You think the leadership is missing in action, and like Todd said, we should be having that special meeting right away, and plus your overall thoughts on just how this got so out of control?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost it's one of those where, you move an inch, you move an inch, you move an inch, and before you realize it, you're approving $20 million in expenditure without the proper authorities in place. I expect that most of those expenditures were probably unavoidable by the time they got to that point. So I don't, not being involved in the project, I can't say whether it was right to spend the money or wrong to spend the money. The question is, as Todd said, an ethical one as to following financial process and procedure and ensuring that the taxpayer money is being administered in the way that the voters intended. It looks like it wasn't. However, we do have an investigation and we do have a process, and I am not anxious to rush to any sort of judgment. There's been significant changes in senior leadership on the staffing side. If in fact council was kept in the dark, that's a whole other series of questions as to how that was even possible, let alone whether or not it really happened. We're jumping the gun, I think, to be having in-depth conversations about information that we only know pieces of. And you don't have to look very far afield to see that making commentary and decisions with only half the information is dangerous. So I would prefer to sit tight and wait to see what happens. So I'm with Todd. I'd like to see the results of a special meeting, and I do think it needs to be on the calendar sooner rather than later. there may be a reason it didn't happen the immediate day after. That could be as simple as scheduling.
Mackenzie, your thoughts? Do we have to kind of go slowly here, or should we? Is it there's a lot of people out there, especially on social media. Can the bunch of them and call an election, all that kind of stuff, which is of course probably a little too far out there in left field. But where do you think the city needs to go with all this?
Yeah, I think saying can them all right off the bat is a little bit hasty. I think we need to actually do an investigation and see what's going on. I am happy that Councillor Ramsey and Councillor Sampson dug deeper, because they were saying, this wouldn't have come out unless they were asking those questions. So I am pretty happy as a young person to see other young people standing up and, questioning things and making sure that these things are coming out, because 34 million could have been used for a lot of things in this city. And of course it was going to be, close to 10 or something like that beforehand. And a lot of these were unavoidable, like Tracy was saying, with, things happen, mistakes happen, but that there was no accountability or transparency is the biggest problem. And we need to make sure that it's clear and there's accountability for what's happening at City Hall. And I am interested to see, what the legal action is, if there's any, for the city manager knowing beforehand and hiding it purposely, or what happened there, because that's what the headlines seem to be saying. So, we can't just be reading the headlines and then jumping to conclusions and saying the mayor should resign. I saw that and that shocked me a little bit, because I don't think that is the solution. I think that they need to call a special meeting right away. So there needs to be quicker action. And you were saying, should it be slow? No, I think it should be fast to get to the bottom of it. But our action shouldn't be quick to fire everyone, because that's, where has that worked? That doesn't work. So.
Yeah. We got a question, or more of actually a comment from Phil Bolio, who's watching, asking why they didn't use the off-street parking, fund it through off-street parking as per the sustainable spending guidelines, which is a good question. And frankly, Phil, I don't know the answer to that. Chuck, I don't. Do you know the answer to that? But I'll if you do, we'll jump right in. But I guess part of it is that it appears that if what was suggested at the city council meeting, staff there basically agreed to increase the project to $20 million without. This was before the city manager at the time, Kathleen Stoltis, actually had the spending authority to do so. So if that actually happened, what are the ramifications of that, Chuck? Or what can the city do?
Well, it just sounds ludicrous to me, actually. The whole idea. I don't see how somebody could have that ability to boost the budget $8 million without actually having signing authority to do so. That just makes no sense. That's they boosted the budget 2/3, and without even batting an eye, basically, not saying boo to anybody. And then on top of that, it went up another $14 million. Okay. If I rebuilt my kitchen and my budget was $10,000 and it came in at $30,000, I'm looking for somewhere to live. Like,
well, you wouldn't be building a city kitchen because you're only in tens of thousands of dollars, right? So
yeah, I mean, we're not talking millions here. This is only thousands. Yeah. So when it gets to the state it's in right now, heads have got to roll somewhere. And I know that an investigation needs to be done, and it needs to be done quickly, and it needs to be decisive. I mean, this is a despicable leak. It's just as if there's a hole in the city coffers there, and this should never happen. So something needs to be done. It needs to be done very quickly, and the whole way things are handled throughout the bureaucracy at City Hall needs to change because this can never happen again. That's a huge amount of money.
Tracy, you were going to jump in there?
Yeah, I just think it's important that everybody remember how the actual staffing authority and structure works over there. I mean, everybody worked for Kathleen and Kathleen worked for City Council. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that Kathleen no longer is in her job for whatever reason. No one really was super public about how that happened, but something happened there that precipitated Kathleen leaving. And so when we start to talk about where the blame lay, it kind of depends on what the investigation tells us. If it was senior staff keeping her in the dark, there's an issue there. If it was her keeping council in the dark, there's an issue there. You know, if council knew and never said anything, there's an issue there. Like, who knows which issue we're talking about, but it's important to recognize that not all of senior staff have direct access to council from a hierarchical standpoint.
Todd, we've been talking about an investigation. This obviously has to be an independent investigation because you can't really get staff at City Hall to take a close look at this. So do you think that's the way they're going to go or should go?
Absolutely. I think there should have been an independent auditor called immediately. I think there are immediate changes that need to happen. You know, Councillor Corrigall has sat on finance and audit for 15, 16, 18 years. He's been the chair while this came forward to council for their approval, while the spending authority change went forward to council for their approval. That came with finance and audit's stamp of approval. You know, Councillor Corrigall stepping down, at least from finance and audit, sends a clear message that that's one step that can change. From a hierarchical standpoint, as Tracy mentioned, you know, a director or general manager, whoever they're classified at this point, may not have direct access to council per the tree structure of that. But to say that you couldn't email or connect with one of them is untrue. When I was there, I mean, I got independent emails and phone calls from councillors, evenings, nights, weekends. I could have had any conversations I wanted to have. But this does need to occur swiftly. I stand firmly by the fact that the first budget meeting is supposed to be on January 25th. The issue is that $22 million of taxpayer money that was sitting in reserves for what we only could hope was future-looking initiatives to help our community grow and better ourselves is now gone. What's the accountability matrix look like for that? There's people who are hired into leadership positions that need to take accountability. There's people elected into leadership positions that need to take accountability for that. That accountability should not be turned back to taxpayers to say, we've lost $22 million. We need to recover that through taxation right now. That is not the look that is going to be successful. The look that's not going to be successful is taking the money that the provincial government has given to the municipalities to help through COVID and assign that there. The route is not taking the transfer payment from Fortis BC that's coming next year and assigning it to these losses. These are losses that this council and this administration need to rectify.
But Todd, there's a difference between calling it a loss and it being an overrun on a project. Like it's not a loss. That money was spent in ways that are trackable. We know where the checks went. It's not like anybody on council or staff are stuffing checks in their pockets. This is a project that happened. There were reasons to go forward with the project, and there were expenditures that happened as a result of issues that happened during the process. Like I don't like the language around referring to it as a loss, because I'm afraid that frames it up in the public's mind as if that money was flushed down the toilet or was squirted out of somebody's jeans. Like it's a project, it's a capital asset, it's built, it exists, it's there. The money's not lost. It's just, was it spent by the people who had the authority to spend it in the way they ought to have spent it?
Right, so it's been deferred to a project that wasn't approved necessarily in that truest sense. That's reserve funding that could have been allocated to greater enhancements to our underground infrastructure, which we know is aging as it is in every other municipality across the country. It could have been used to add facilities. It could have been used to offset loans going towards a pool. It could have been used to enhancing transit services that allow part-time workers to get to and from work without the need for a vehicle. So when I say a loss, I agree with your analogy. You're right. Probably a loss is maybe a little bit strong language on that. It is misappropriated money that maybe wasn't used in the best needs. And we've seen countless times where we've gone to alternative approval processes because people won't just stand up and take ownership for making a decision that cost increases on everything. And we could have used that money much, much more wisely to the long-term benefit of the entire community.
That may be, but if the project's got a hole in the ground and you're already committed to the project itself, and now you're faced with these additional expenses that have to do with increases in costs around steel, because my understanding was it had to do with steel tariffs and some perhaps not entirely fulsome engineering investigations prior to construction. Like, we already had a hole in the ground when these changes happened. As if I'm wrong there, correct me. But
a mistake on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part, though. The municipal financing authority exists for certain reasons, and if they were so genuinely concerned about a hole in the ground and overruns, they could have financed that, put that $22 million towards the pool and lessened that financing. It would have been a much more open and public process. But as we've indicated, some or one.
Go ahead. It's my understanding that the increased cost of steel, and there was a list of other ones that increased the budget by 2.9 million. So there's a lot that went on. The big part of one of the cost overruns was that the city simply didn't account for everything else it would have to do. It budgeted for a project in the ground, not realizing that this project was going to go out around, like you have to, so you put a new building in, well, you need new sewer over here to attach to it and all that kind of stuff. And that's a big part of that extra cost that pushed it up to 34 million. It's over and above the actual cost of the parkade. So yeah, there was a definite failure there on behalf of the city to look at all that stuff, right?
Maybe there's an argument to be made that by putting it all into this project, they were actually being more transparent than not. Because if in fact these are expenses that could have been buried into sewer upgrades or electrical changes, you could in theory have married them up to different parts of the capital budget for the city and never showed them as attached to this project. I'm guessing, because again, as I said at the outset, this is all speculation until we see a report.
Yeah, but it come around the same sort of thing, and that's the oldest trick in the book too. When you're a project guy, is once you got the hole in the ground, well, nobody's going to say no.
I think that's a lot of it going on, is they've got a hole in the ground and they can go, well, now we need to do this, we need to do that. Yeah. And I think that's how it happened. But the scope of it is what gets me. You know, I mean, yeah, 2.9 million in extra steel costs and et cetera, you know, but to run another, what, 20 million or 19 million up and above that, that's a huge amount of money. And I think the scope just shows a lack of respect for the process and the way things are done, you know, and the responsibility for it. Just offhand doing this, it just seems wrong. It seems like there's a whole culture that needs to change at City Hall and the way things are done in a project.
Yeah,
well, taking the lowest bid's never a good plan.
Yeah. I think that's totally correct, Chuck. I did have a question, Todd. You were saying something about Frizzell as the finance person, and then you said something about him stepping down. Has that happened, or were you saying he should?
No, that hasn't happened, but I certainly think he should step down as chair of that committee.
Okay. Yeah, I think it comes down to who created the budget in the first place as well, because I don't know, it's just when that project started, how do you not see that those things are going to happen? The things that were inevitable, not the, you know, the tariffs, but the things that were water pipes and sewer and the things that are usually attached to projects. I mean, who created that without looking at the full picture? And now they're kind of putting it together as they go. And like, because the hole is open, you know, they're going to say, well, we can't do anything else until we do this, so we need the money somewhere. And I think it's just about, I mean, if these are inevitable costs, sure, but where's the accountability and transparency? And it was hidden, or somehow the communication was disconnected. So I think that's the biggest thing that we need to focus on right now.
And it's also one of three, Mackenzie. It's, you know, the Willowcale Bridge is the other one, and $2 million on the fire hall that was arbitrarily decided by the city manager of the day to go with. I mean, this is when you talk about legal cases, you want precedents. And I mean, there's endless precedents of this behavior, and then a lack of accountability that comes with it. I guess I shouldn't necessarily say a lack of accountability. There were some changes as a result of Willow Kale. There was likely some changes at the top as a result of several issues and projects.
They all
There's
seem
a
to
lot more accountability.
It's always out of poor planning from as an outsider looking in. It always seems like something significant got missed at the bid moment, and then the lowest bid gets accepted, and all of a sudden all of these other things come to light, and now we've got an expenditure issue.
Part of it too is looking at things at 2017 and then starting them in 2020. Everything changes during that time. I mean, even the underground infrastructure, which I'd be surprised if the engineering team hadn't looked at, because they've got, you know, direct digital access to all of our underground infrastructure. But over the course of that time, it probably hasn't changed that dramatically, of course. But you know, dollars change. We all know year over year. And to Bill's point, you know, the steel and aluminum tariffs, while they were prohibitive for some, we did quite a bit of work at the chamber on that too, and they weren't huge. So $2.9 million in the grand scheme of things of $34 million is a percentage, not a grandiose number.
And part of it, I think, probably maybe delve into the issue, and I'll ask everybody, is the how much authority should city council, or oversight, I guess, should city council have? There's always that fine balancing point of city council has to be accountable for the money, and they have to, you want them to, you know, to know what's going on. But then again, we don't need them to, you know, be signing off on every box of paper clips that's needed at City Hall. But they have to have some authority. And I think in the last few years, we've perhaps slid away from that, or city council. And I've seen local governments at different levels do this in different ways. You know, there's always the one, you know, oh, we're a policy board. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but sometimes you got to roll your sleeves up and take a look at the finances as well, and see what's actually going on. Does council, where's the fine line on that? Whoever wants to jump in.
I think they did just update that, right? So now, because they saw this happening, and so they said, we can't approve it $400 or $500. You know, if there's a overcharge on a project, it'll take a month to get through all of the processes for us to approve that. I think they capped it at 5% of the project, or $1 million or something like that. So that when large chunks of money have to be approved on, it goes to council, and it's not every box of paper clips, but it's not $20 million either. There needs to be a fine line. And I think that they looked at other municipalities to see what that was. And I think they stuck with 5% of the project, I believe, but I haven't dove deep into that, but yeah.
I think Councillor Ramsey's motion was the right motion, a delegated authority report that comes back quarterly. That's going to pretty much catch most, if not all, things as they go forward. You know, where's the fine line? I don't know that there is a fine line. I think council, as the elected leaders, need to make a decision that is in the best interests of the community for them to be able to hold those leadership positions. And that's really where it ends in my mind. They can make it as onerous a process or as easy of a process as they wish to make it. But I also think, you know, we're at a point where council is likely at some point in the not too distant future to put a posting out for a city manager. This is a bit of a black stain on the community. My fear is, what does that do to the candidates who come back? Because any savvy CAO is going to find this information. They're going to look at that and say, I might have a really operational council for the next 4 years. I don't know if this is the right opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Or they might look at it and say, geez, these guys don't know what they're doing. I can go in and do whatever I want. we've had a few of those in the past too. So yeah, it is a fine balancing act. But this one, it's my understanding, it was the pressing by Brian Skaken, and then followed up by some, you know, Kyle Sampson and Corey Ramsey and Terry McConaughey to some degree, that they actually got this information out. Otherwise, this would have just went by the wayside. It was originally a line item in the 5-year capital plan, I believe. So yeah, how do you, Chuck, how much should council be involved in these things?
A whole bunch more than they are, apparently. I think the idea of having like a 5% or a 10% ceiling to what an overrun can be before it has to go before council makes a lot of sense. I mean, nobody is going to begrudge a project a 5% overrun, but you need to be there to keep an eye on it, right? Somebody should be making sure that it's going the way it needs to, and this is being approved for what we need. I really think council needs to be more hands-on. I mean, yeah, you've got people that you trust in bureaucracy, and hopefully, anyhow, and they have a job to do and you expect them to do it, but you've got to be there to oversee it. That's what you're elected for, or at least that's what I believe them to be elected for. So yeah, I think they really need to be keeping a closer eye on things, and I think it needs to go before council before you cross that $1 million mark, or before it gets any worse than that. You need to be checking it out and finding out what's the best way to go, where we're going to get these funds. Is there another way of doing it? Is there a way of funding it somehow somewhere else, or what can we do? So yeah, I think we really need to look at that process and bring council a little more to the fore, and a little more into the accountability. If there's a set process and a line where they have to intervene, then we know who's responsible all the time, not this we have no idea what happened thing that's going on right now.
And Tracy, just how much should I guess staff has to be more, because I know first thing when this came up, first thing that I thought of was when I lived in the corporate world, which was really all that corporate. But one of the things that I knew, come to know over time, was that I could do pretty much whatever I wanted, as long as I didn't make my boss look bad. There's some of that too, and it's keeping your bosses informed, and it seems in this case that didn't happen.
Yeah, there's some sort of communication issue going on in there, and I have no idea what it is, not being on the inside of that bricks and mortar. But I mean, council are not going to be experts in all of the various areas. That's why they have expert staff working for their city manager. And so if you're a councillor whose part-time job is to read your package and show up at your council meeting, you have to rely on the advice and the recommendations and the expertise of the staff that you have. And then you rely on your city manager to know when that expertise is flawed or perhaps not as transparent as it ought to be. I still maintain that you've seen the change in the city manager. I have no idea why, but there's a change in the city manager. It's too coincidental to not be related, in my view, because Todd's right. There's more than one project we're talking about here. We've had almost the same conversation about that bridge, and again about the fire hall in the last year or so. Clearly there's something going on there, and whether it's at the bid process and taking the lowest bid, whether it's a lack of expertise within the city and an unwillingness to spend the money to get that expertise on these individual projects at a time when it can make a difference in planning, or whether it's actual willful, I don't know, malfeasance. That's the one I don't buy. I think that this has more to do with trying to move the money around to get the projects built in a way that's going to further the goals of the community and the elected officials we put in place. But I haven't seen a report, and I have no inside knowledge to give you. I just know that if you start talking about a council that's going to mess around with every single decision, City Hall's grinding to a halt. And if you want council to be that much more expert and that much more involved, then you need to assume it's more than a part-time job, and we need to pay them accordingly.
Yeah, I think back to my time in Williams Lake when they built the Caribou Memorial Complex, and they had to trim some money, and the politicians decided physically what to trim out of the building. And then it was affectionately known as the White Elephant after it was built, because there was a lot of design things done there that were really ended up costing them way more money down the road.
As I recall, there was an old city council that got involved in the RCMP building, and it's underground parking. And anybody who's tried to park anywhere near that lovely new building knows that removing that underground parking was not a decision that should have been made by someone who didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah. So that's sort of the question, Mackenzie, we're just talking about, you need experts for these kind of things. So you rely on, at City Hall, we've got engineers, I don't know if there's architects, but, we've got professional people on staff. So hopefully we can rely on them, trust them. I guess that's part of that is trust, and you've got to be able to trust the people that are doing these jobs.
Yeah, I mean, we're not electing engineers for the most part. We're electing people that we think can represent us to the best of their ability, that we trust and that have our best interest in mind. And then they rely on city staff that are engineers, that have, their degrees and their PhDs in these things. We're not that's just how elections are set up. Even MLAs and MPs, we're not electing people that are engineers or professionals in every single aspect that they have to deal with. If you're an MLA or MP, you have to touch on 72,000 different topics. You're not an expert on all of them. That's why you have staff and experts that you rely on. So if you can't rely on those experts because some things are going on and maybe some of them are not as much as experts as you think they are, or there's someone new, or they're not looking closely at the budget when they're creating these projects, which it seems like that's kind of what's happening here, is they're not noticing or thinking about the bigger picture of how much this is actually going to cost, then you have that problem. But if we want our elected officials to be more of experts in these fields and work harder to do this, they only get paid $30,000 a year. That's not enough to survive. They need a second job. So that this is a part-time job. So people don't realize that. People always just call for, oh my gosh, the elected officials need to be paid less, but they don't actually know how much they're paid. So.
Well, that leads into another question, Todd. If we're going to give council a little more oversight, should we have full-time councillors?
Yeah, I just want to take a step back, because Mackenzie hit on something that I think that's vitally important in this, and that's the staff over at the city. Presumably at this point, there's one or a few bad actors that have been involved in this. And without that quick action from council to move forward with the investigations, or to at least have some discussions with some results coming out of them immediately, all of staff is now going to get painted with this brush. And we can see how these things will spiral out of control quite quickly on social media. And it's not fair to the professionals, to the engineers, to the road workers, to the frontline staff to face the brunt of a lack of leadership and bad decision making. And so that's the other part of this that really needs to be a major discussion. And I certainly hope council and senior admin is talking about that, because they take a lot of heat as it is. And this has only turned that dial up to 11 on them. And it's not fair to those people who have no role to play in this to get painted with that brush. Back to your question, Bill, I don't think we're at a point right now where we need full-time counselors. I have been looking and have been talking to other people if there was an opportunity to develop a ward system here that might create a better sense of accountability. I understand the challenges that come with that, but I still think there's some opportunities that come with that too. And that would be sort of step one in a growth initiative that may migrate to full-time council positions down the road. But it also gives residents an opportunity to find that single source of local elected representation that they can turn to and say, I don't like this or I don't like that, and have those direct conversations and have your representative at the table. Which makes it much easier at election time too, if you can turn around and say, boy, I don't think Bill Phillips is representing me the way I feel that I should be represented in my neighborhood. So I'm voting for Tracy Calogheros.
Oh, that's a location based. So someone would be in charge of the city, someone would be in charge of College Heights. Okay.
Correct.
Let's throw another wrinkle into that. What about having a ward for the Clayton today? Like that's what they want at the school district. Is that? We'll move over to Chuck. What are your thoughts on moving into the school district? But if we do create a ward system in the city, would that would that make sense as well?
Well, yeah, I think you would have to, if you're going to break it down to a ward system like that, I think you would have to include a ward that covers like the Lightly Tene or Shelley or somewhere, you know, some area like that. But coming from Calgary, which did, I'm not sure if it still does, but did have a ward system, it's very cumbersome. And it comes with its own problems. Instead of having everything all working together, trying to get all the wards working together can become a bit of a problem too. So I don't know if that's the best way to do things, you know. I think we just need to
we can all reach them now. Like,
pardon?
We can all reach them now. Like, I don't know. I don't have anything against a ward system necessarily, but you can bump into any one of our counselors at the grocery store or at the gas station. You
Exactly.
can text them, phone them. Like, they're not hard to reach.
Yeah, I think it's easier the way we've got it. We just have to make sure that they wake up and they're paying attention to what we're doing, you know? Yeah, I really don't know if a ward system is the way to go. I really think maybe we need to just have everyone looking at what's going on. Maybe we don't want every single thing coming out of the city being sifted through council, but like I say, it's got to be a level where you've got to take a closer look. And yeah, if you do get to that, say that $1 million mark, where it's a cost overrun of $1 million, yeah, then it's got to be taken a look at. You know, I just don't see that you need Johnny to take a look at College Heights and Peter to take a look at the Heart, you know, because Johnny and Peter may not talk. So let's have everybody talking together and making it work.
Phil Bolio just made another comment, and we talk about ward system, and it's a good point. It's one of the things with ward system is you end up with city councilors bargaining for pet projects all the time. So, you know, I'll support you on your bridge in your area, you support me for my sidewalk in my area. And it ends up sometimes, as Phil says, not with a cohesive plan. So that's a fair point too. So there's plus and minuses to everything. And I know I'm along the same sort of lines, is that like Chuck or like Tracy was saying, you know, you can run into city councilors in the supermarket here. We're not that big a city yet. I don't think that our councilors are that unapproachable. So,
Bill, could we circle back to your comment about the Lheidli T'enneh and their role? I just wanted to make the statement that, first of all, I think it would make more sense tied into the regional district, given that the reserve at Castan-Lago is outside of city limits. But I think realistically, we're talking about a government to government relationship. And by providing a seat for the Lheidli T'enneh, either at the city or at the regional district, in fact, you're making them subject to another level of non-Indigenous government. I think now the regular meetings between Chairman Kane, Mayor Hall, and Dai Poutney, they're meeting regularly and they're making decisions and discussions on that government to government level. I don't know that it would be appropriate to add a Lheidli seat, but if there was going to be discussion, it would make sense at the regional district rather than the city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. Mackenzie, any thoughts on that? Or maybe not necessarily a Lheidli seat, maybe it's just an Indigenous seat?
No, I think what Tracy was saying makes sense, because I was just thinking about government to government relations. And if you just say you get one seat and one vote on a city council, that's like saying that you're smaller or less important, so you only get one position. Whereas if you have a whole city council talking with a whole Indigenous council, then it's more equal. And I don't think that just, you know, like lowering them to have one seat is acceptable either. I think that it's great on the school district to have, you know, a seat in that situation, but I just think that there's a lot of thought that has to go into things like that. So I don't have one quick sentence to answer that question, because it's a very deep thing. So,
well, as politicians will tell you, the greatest challenge of politics, especially the municipal level, isn't coming up with good ideas. It's convincing 3 or 4 other people around the table that have the same idea. That's what it's all about. So it's not about having, the answers to everything. It's about getting people on your side, I guess it is, to get the votes, because the votes carry the day.
And being open to new ideas and not just thinking that you have all of the ideas, and being able to talk about things like a ward system, whereas, in a lot of situations it would just be shut down immediately because it's changed, something new, but we need to be able to have those discussions on the pros and cons and where we can change to make things better.
Mm-hmm. And that's probably a good segue to where we can make things better. And let's look down south to all the fun that's going on down there. Let's, I just got the TV on over here right now, and they're going through their hearings for impeachment for Donald Trump. Tracy, where do you think this is all going to end up? Should they toss him out with just a week left to go, or what are your
Absolutely, without a doubt, he needs to be impeached. I don't care if he's got 5 minutes left in the big chair. It's not about actually moving him out of it. The man has caused an armed insurrection, and he is organized internationally to make that happen. I'm flabbergasted. I was on an international call today with the Association of Science and Tech Centers, and there was a gentleman from Warsaw in Poland, and he was expressing to our American colleagues the horror with which Poland in Warsaw was watching this. Absolutely, he has to be impeached. What he has done is wrong, and perhaps it will fracture the Republican Party, and there will be a return to a more core Republican, as opposed to this fringe push that has been so vocal and has really dragged that party in the Tea Party direction. It's my opinion. I mean, I'm a Canadian, I'm on the outside. What do I know? I'm a liberal.
Yeah. Well, the analogy, I used to be a basketball referee, so the analogy I used is that didn't matter the score. If there's 2 seconds left in the game, you still call a foul. And my view, that's the way it should be down there. So you call the foul and you administer the penalty. Chuck, your thoughts on, where's this all going to end up? There's calls now for more armed protests as Inauguration Day comes forward.
It's a mess. It's a huge mess. Trump was always going to do this, right? I mean, it was going to happen. You saw it as soon as he started to go into the loss of the election. He was like a upset child who wants to take his ball and go home. And this is a man who just should never, ever be in a position of power. I don't know how they got there. I think it's going to take hundreds of years of analysis to figure this one out. But he's just a mess. He's the worst thing that could have possibly happened to the US, and they need to pull him out of power right away, get him away from anything that allows him to reach out in spite and do anything. Because I think that's what he will do. The closer we get to the 20th, I think he's just going to get more agitated and try to pull something else. So, yeah, get him out now. I mean, really, just lock him up. I mean, come on.
Lock him up.
He's done enough. He really has done enough to be locked up. I mean, anywhere else, we would just lock him up. If he was in Canada, we would have, we would have just disappeared him a long time ago.
Todd, your thoughts on this? Do you think this is going to get worse before it gets better down there?
Well, he is going to be impeached, and he'll be impeached today, most likely. McConnell said this morning he's not going to reconvene the Senate before the 19th, so he's not going to be tried in the Senate on that. So it will defer to the next Senate. He will be charged. Those charges will stand, and then they will go for every piece of legislation they can to block him from ever running for public office again. And that is for the good of everybody. I was upset watching that all unfold, because it was like, and I get the US is not the shining star on the hill that they seem to think that they are, because their democracy has been a sham for quite a long time. But I grew up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s when their democracy was very strong and their country was growing at a significant clip. And growing up in Toronto, the US was somewhere where you traveled quite regularly. So it was sad to watch that happen because it felt almost like the death of the democracy. And it felt like the challenges ahead of them are so insurmountable that it's not 1 term or 2 terms or 3 terms or 4 terms. This is like a decades long process that's now going to have to take hold there to re-envision this. I think the most powerful thing that's happened over the last 2 or 3 days, or maybe even more, is watching all of these large organizations, whether it be chambers of commerce or significant corporations that have said, money's done for anybody who voted in the wrong way and allowed this insurrection to happen. That is very, very powerful for a party who genuinely outraises their opponents by a significant margin at all points throughout the year, whether there's an election or not. That is a powerful statement. And I think that's why you're seeing some of the more senior, smart politicians on that side now siding with impeachment and coming out very clearly with those statements. So things are going to move, I think, relatively quickly, probably not quickly enough. He should have been ousted with the 25th Amendment. But as we've seen time and time again, some people are a little bit spineless when it comes to this stuff. And if they see their political career as lengthy, which Mike Pence certainly should not see his political career as, they make decisions based on advisors' recommendations and not based on what's the best for their constituents. And in this case, the vice president's constituents are the entire country.
Mm-hmm. Mackenzie, your thoughts? A lot of this is being fueled by right-wing rhetoric, extreme off to the right, racism, white nationalism, all that kind of stuff. Do you fear, or do you see a lot of that seeping up into Canada, which is what everything in the US kind of does?
Well, I think that it's bigger than Trump. It's cultural now. I mean, 70 million people voted for him, and this is extremely dangerous. I think what we're seeing, look at the size of rallies that we had in Alberta. We had 10 or 15 people in Prince George. Look how many people voted for Bob Zimmer, and he's a Trump supporter. This is in Canada, no doubt. And a lot of people say, I don't see how we're affected by it up here in Prince George. It's fine. That's just a dumpster fire that I can laugh at on the TV, but that's not true. It's actually very dangerous, and it's in Canada now. And we see the rise of the alt-right, and we're seeing what Erin O'Toole is saying. And we're seeing that rhetoric, that, divisive, racist, homophobic rhetoric coming out of politicians, that want to pander to that base. And I think that even with him impeached, hopefully today, we are still probably, I'm a very optimistic person, but I think that we're going to see violence down south, regardless of if he's impeached or not. I think people are going to be very upset that he's impeached, and his followers are going to take to the streets again. And, they're locking down a whole bunch of buildings to keep people safe. We saw how the Republicans were acting when they had to be locked in the same room as Democrats. They were refusing to wear masks, and now Democrats have COVID. This is cultural. It's not just him. So I think that this is very dangerous, and we need to call it what it is. We need to call it out, not just say, well, if you ignore it, it'll go away, or, don't give it a platform, don't talk about it. That's not going to fix this. This needs to be talked about, and it needs to be out in the open so that people see how bad it is. Because right now, if we're just trying to push it on the states or say, oh, it's just a couple people, that is what leads to it becoming bigger and us not noticing. And then before we realize, there's thousands of people that are doing these types of things in Canada, which we're already seeing with groups coming out of Alberta. That's where the largest amount of this is coming from, if you look at the organizations that are doing these types of things. So I think that we need to talk about it how it really is, and not just downplay it, because I see a lot of that happening.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, Tracy, Twitter and Facebook and that, they've all pulled Trump off those platforms, and that sort of ignites some of the free speech debate, or how big these social media platforms have gotten and how much power they are. Do you think that's the right move for, or that Twitter and Facebook should be able to ban Trump from having his say, or is,
Twitter was the grown-up in the room on the 6th when they suspended his account.
all I could say was, I wish you'd done it sooner. These are private companies. Their ability to control who uses their megaphone to give what message is up to them. They are a private company. Whether or not they're too big and a monopoly is a separate question. I think there's some real challenges and dangers around the size of some of these companies and what impacts that'll have on our decisions as a society going forward. But does a private company have the right to say, we're not going to allow violence and hate speech on our site, and we're not going to help you propagate the next round of assaults on the Capitol? Absolutely, they have the right to do it. And I would argue they have the social responsibility to do it, given that they've created this megaphone.
Chuck, what are your thoughts?
I agree completely with Tracy. They have the right and they have the responsibility to do so. And really, Trump should have been cut off months ago, if not 4 years ago. I mean, he just should not be able to pull together the alt-right like that and basically create an army that's going to attack the Capitol. That's just, he shouldn't have that ability. And it's got to be stopped. That's just got to be stopped. I think that now that everyone's been stirred up and this has happened, there's a good chance that the States is going to go a much more violent route for the next little while. I don't see this going to a quiet, easy dismissal after this swearing in. There's a chance, and people have talked of it, of civil war down there. And it could be because of what he's brought forward already. So, I don't know. His voice should have been cut long ago, in my thoughts. That's just an opinion. But when you see what he's done with that voice, it's very sad. And they need to, I think every platform needs to look more closely at what's being said through them.
Todd, do social media platforms, do they have too much power? Should they be maybe broken up? Mackenzie mentioned Bob Zimmer. He's on the panel that convenes in a bar somewhere, was my understanding, complaining about the dominance of some of these social media platforms. Do they have too much power?
Well, they have a lot of power, but they also have a lot of opportunity that's provided. I mean, I spent time in the territories working for CBC, and the greatest irony I found was when I went over to Nunavut, was they all communicated through Facebook. Nobody texted. They used Facebook Messenger. That was their mode of communication. And so there's good things that come out of these. It's very easy to look up and see the negative and say, no good, cancel culture, get everybody out. We've got to stop this right now. Do I agree that Trump needed to be banned? 100%. And it needed to happen a long, long time ago. He was consistently using it for vitriol and hatred. That passed because he was the president and they didn't want to face unnecessary policy regulations coming down on them. That was a business decision by them that, as we can look back now, has backfired on them. I don't think there's going to be civil war down in the US. I think there's been civil unrest and racial unrest in the US for hundreds of years that will unfortunately probably not resolve itself anytime soon. But there's always going to be factions of people, whether it be Canadians or Americans or Lithuanians, who have problems with their government and believe that they are being unjustly treated by government policy. But stand up, put your name forward for an election, pitch your points. If there's enough people that buy into it, you will be elected. We're seeing a number of these Trump disciples that have been elected to Congress and the Senate, and they will face whatever challenges come their way, and we will see how it works out in the end. Democracy works that way, and it's still proven to work that way.
Right on. And on that note, we're kind of at the end of our time here, and an hour passes fairly quickly. I'd like to thank Tracy Calogheros, good to see you back, Chuck Nisbett, Todd Corrigall, and Mackenzie Kerr for joining us again, and for everybody who's been watching online. Just go around the horn quick. Anybody's got a message to send out to anybody as we sign off?
Well, I'd just like to say that I agree with Todd. I don't see a civil war. My fervent hope is that this is the last gasp of the patriarchy worldwide, and that, yes, we're watching nasty stuff right now, but give it a little bit of time for things to cool off, and you're going to see a shift in leadership, not just in gender, but in age, and that will change how policy is made and how discussions happen. So patience and calm is what I'm hoping for.
Be safe. Chuck, any final words?
I'd just like to say, well, we're on the way. We're fighting. We're fighting back against COVID. People are getting vaccinated now. I know the problems at Jubilee Lodge are starting to turn around. They have a number of residents that have recovered from COVID, and let's just keep it all moving forward. Everybody keep the masks on and social distancing, and before too long, we might all be out of this thing and be able to get together and have a drink or something. So let's keep our fingers crossed and keep at it.
Todd?
We're hosting the True North event, which is usually an in-person event, that's going to be virtual. And I just finished our first prep call before this. We have an amazing few panels going on. One of them I will note, because they're relevant to this, is a women in leadership panel. And we have MLA and leader of the Green Party, Sonia Furstenau, MLA and leader of the Liberal Party, Shirley Bond, Executive Vice President, External Relations for LNG Canada, soon to be the Canadian President of Shell Canada, and Country Manager, Susanna Pierce, and the Executive Vice President of Health and Safety and Human Resources for Fortis BC, Jody Drope, and that's being moderated by Shauna Harper, and that's going to be a phenomenal panel. So if you're looking for tickets, pgchamber.bc.ca.
What's the date of that again, Todd?
January 25th.
Going up quick. Mackenzie?
Yeah, I just want to encourage everyone to keep wearing their masks, and things are open. Local businesses are open. I'll take Todd's local business pitch and tell people to go to local businesses. Farmers markets open on Saturdays. You know, they're looking for more people to come down. They're open right now. Keep socially distanced and call your grandparents, because it's tough for them right now.
Exactly. So, we got takeout last night for Takeout Tuesday. So yeah, to support your local businesses, and we'll see you all again next week.